Hi, Cinematic Enthuse here. It is September 12th, 2024. And I'm going to make it a little bit later. And I would like to attempt to go through some of the movies that I watched. This was like almost 3 months ago. So I'm going to see how far I get. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to talk to you about some of my reviews of the movies or my thoughts on them. This edition is from the classic era, so basically 1930 to 1970 films that I picked out. Um, some of them you're going to recognize, and some maybe not as well known. But so bear with me as I go through them here. And you can find all of these at my Instagram or my link tree. Basically, both links are available at both places at Cinematic Enthuse, and they contain a Google Doc that's got a whole bunch of movies on it, everything from 1930 to 2019. I think the most recent movie I put on this particular uh, account was from like 4 or 5 years ago. So that's a pretty wide range, and they're mostly comedies and musicals. So, okay, let's get to it here. Now, I may come back and watch this movie again because it's just such a fan favorite for everybody. Singin' in the Rain is probably one of the most famous musicals of all time. But I thought I'd bring up today the fact that after not watching it, it'd been maybe at least a couple of years since I'd seen it. And what's interesting is something different usually pops up in my head every time I see one of these movies that's familiar to me. And this time around, I was thinking about the fact that when I first saw this movie, it was probably 30 years ago. And at the time, well, it was probably more like 40 years ago. And at the time, that was probably in the 80s. And if you remember back then, most of these were just available on VHS, video cassette. So what you had people doing, and of course, you could watch old movies on TV depending on what the programmers decided to put on there. So what I'm getting at is I remember back in the 80s, if you wanted to watch classic film on video, like rented at your local video store, I just remember there being a lot of stuff from the 50s, some 40s, but in the musical genre, there really wasn't a whole lot that I recall from the 1930s, for example, in the musical department back then on videotape. So, what I grew up watching musical wise was a lot of musicals from the 50s and like maybe some 40s. But, when you think about the fact that Singin' in the Rain is, I think, 1953 or 54, but it's obviously about the 30s. And what's interesting about it is all of the songs, or almost all the songs, are written by Herb Nasio, I think his name is. And he was a really famous, like Tin Pan Alley composer, and wrote like a ton of songs that you probably know if you just Google him on Wikipedia. And a lot of them were used in 1930s musicals that fast forward to 5 years ago, which is another 40 years later, I had never seen anything like Broadway Melody, of 1937 and all the different Broadway Melody series, which that's kind of what Singin' in the Rain bases its template on, basically, musically, and also maybe even the story. I think it's mostly centered around the Broadway Melody series. And so when I first saw Sing in the Rain, I didn't realize I knew I was watching an homage to the 1930s because it's kind of obvious. But what I didn't know, because it wasn't really available to me to compare it, was that it was kind of like taking some of the songs from those 1930s musicals. I just assumed they were written, at the time that Singin' in the Rain was filmed. So anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. It would be kind of a fun thing to do to go back and compare like the 1930s Broadway Melody series with Singin' in the Rain. They're different, but musically there's a lot of similarities. So of course, that's always a winner. I'm sure I'll end up talking about that again because It's just such a famous piece. So the next one I think on there, I was in the mood for some favorites. I think I watched Pillow Talk, and I do like watching that for I like Rock Hudson, but I really like Tony Randall in that movie, and Thelma Ritter with Doris Day, and that's always a fun one. Um, Breakfast for Two, I really wanted to see because I like Herbert Marshall. He's somebody that I didn't even know about until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, because he's kind of more of a 1930s person. I think well, he did well. He was in a very famous, I think it was maybe 1940, but you might know him from The Little Foxes because he plays a really great role in that with Betty Davis. But that's more of his dramatic work. But he also was kind of a, people know him from Trouble in Paradise, from 19 whatever that is, 32, I think. But I like him in Breakfast for Two because it gives him a chance to go up against Barbara Stanwyck in a comedy, which is awesome because you've heard me talk about my irritation with her and Henry Fonda in The Lady Eve. Against popular opinion, I think Barbara Stanwyck is amazing, of course, but Henry Fonda in that movie, for some reason, it just doesn't quite work for me. Even though Preston Sturges is amazing as a director and writer, and I like almost all of his films, like a ton. Um, I just have a hard time with that particular pairing. Now, I've seen Henry in another comedy where I liked him a ton, and I thought, gee, why couldn't he be like that in The Lady Eve? But anyway, so I know he could have pulled it off, but I don't know. It's just a quirky thing that I didn't like. But Herbert Marshall with uh, Barbara Stanwyck in this Breakfast for Two, while it may not be on the level of like a Preston Sturges film, it's a short, one of these short little B movies, and I liked it a lot. Um, a lot of the classic things you would want in a 1930s screwball comedy. And it's a nice little pre-movie, if you wanted to watch something afterwards, which is why I like these movies some because they're not that long. Um, so yeah, so we have that one and Petticoat Fever. Eh, that was Myrna Loy, and his name escapes me. It's Robert. It's not Robert Taylor. It's the other Robert. It'll come to me in a minute. He was in. I actually like him quite a bit, but this was one of those things where they tried to do it on location. I think, or actually, it wasn't on location. It probably should have been on location, but it was one of these Arctic, like Alaskan kind of things. And normally I like the sets, but this one was just kind of a little strange. It's okay. Um, Take Me Out to the Ball Game is one that I like Gene Kelly and Frank Sinatra together, and this one's kind of fun. It's not quite on the level of On the Town, which is like one of my favorite musicals ever, but it's got some good moments in it. So check that one out. The Lavender Hill Mob with Alec Guinness. I had been told to see this for years now. I finally saw it. Awesome stuff. 1951, Alec Guinness, amazing stuff. I can't believe I haven't written a review yet on it. I should. I should go back and watch it again just so I can write a review on it. But if you haven't seen it yet, totally need to see this one. It's a lovely like heist kind of film, and a lot of these 50s and 60s English films, British films, there's a lot of good comedies that are like either heists or kind of a Robin Hood type thing. Um, and they're just, some of them are a little bit dastardly and mildly dark, but they're really fun. Gold Diggers of 1937. For some reason, the Gold Digger and the Broadway Melody series kind of blend together for me, probably because some of them have similar cast members in them. But I think this was one with Joan Blondell and Dick Powell. And so I know they're in another Gold Diggers series. I think this might have been the one where they were There's so many that the stories are always very similar. I don't watch these movies for the storyline. So this particular kind, I just watch it for the production and the musicals, sometimes the acting, sometimes the singing, sometimes the dancing. But this one is pretty decent. So it's like it's a BB plus type thing. So if you haven't seen it already, definitely check it out. Some of these I saw like 3 months ago and I don't remember. I remember Brooklyn Orchid 1942, I think was kind of like it kind of had an Edward G. Robinson comedy type feel to it. And so if you're in the mood for something kind of like that, kind of like a New York gangster type thing, it's cool. This one was kind of a dud. A Man Could Get Killed, 1966, James Garner. I really had high hopes for this one. It was supposed to be kind of like a spy spoof, and it just kind of fizzled out on me. Maybe I'll try it again later. But it's on YouTube. Murder on the Blackboard. This one was actually, it's not really a comedy. I kind of thought maybe it would be one of these, drawing room type comedies. But it's got, and I'm trying to look up her name because her first name is Edna Oliver. I think that, or Edna Mae Oliver. I guess she did like 3 or 4 of these movies in the 30s. This one is from 1934, so it's like really practically pre-code. Yeah, 1934, and it's Edna Mae Oliver and James Gleason. And I know James Gleason from he played the cop in Guys and Dolls. So I saw him kind of as an older man in the 50s. So he was doing stuff. He was playing inspectors back in 1934. So maybe he probably made a whole career out of playing policemen. And I think he might even be a relative of, Jackie Gleason. Maybe that's his dad or something like that, or they're related somehow. But anyway, maybe you guys know that. But the Solid Gold Cadillac, I watched that again. That's such a great movie. 1956. It's definitely a women's empowerment career. You can do it in corporate America, taking on the man, all the things you would never expect to happen in a 1950s comedy. Very unusual themes to have in a 1950s comedy. I'm surprised it got made, to be honest. It's really fascinating and it's very funny. That's definitely one that I would highly, highly recommend. And very applicable to today as well. I mean, I think it translates well for today. Now, this one I'm going to read is because it's such a quirky, strange little film, but I liked it, sort of. I'll tell you what I didn't like about it in a minute, because I've got it here on my Letterboxd account. If you're a movie buff who likes logging their reviews or putting little stars on your or making lists of your movies, which I have several lists if you ever want to look at mine. I'm on Letterboxd. Okay. I only gave this 2.5 stars, but I really like Debbie Reynolds. So, it wasn't her problem. And I'll tell you why. The problem with this musical is the lead male actor. This is my review. Normally, I like British actors, but where did they get this guy? He makes Vic Damone look like Richard Burton. The high point of the movie for me was Jane Powell singing Chacun le sait from La Fille de Régiment by Donizetti. The other songs are non-opera and very enjoyable. So you get kind of a little bit of both. And this was, of course, the non-opera songs were boosted by Debbie Reynolds' strong presence. So this is a very unique movie and probably one of the few 1950s movies that addresses a healthy diet and exercise. And I would have given this 3 stars, but that male lead was just awful. I don't even think he was in any, he might have been in one other movie besides that. I don't know what happened. But yeah, otherwise it's fine. It's a really unusual kind of film. Strictly Dynamite. I think that one was, the problem with some of these movies is I really enjoy them, but the titles always kind of elude me because I don't remember them all the time. Oh, Strictly Dynamite, of course. Jimmy Durante, Lupe Velez. I love this movie. This is I just forgot the name of it. It's a really short one. It's like 70 minutes. And it's one of those writer type movies. So if you're a writer and you enjoy the writing process, you'll like this. And it's very 30s, so it's got that kind of like vaudeville kind of feel to it. It's not about vaudeville, but it's really more about like uh, comedy and stuff like that. So, but it's a lot of fun. Lupe is a really good foil for Jimmy Durante. The two of them together are really sweet and kind of fun. And I wish they would have made like tons of movies together because I think they're just as charming as like Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz or any of these, couple. I don't know if they were a couple in real life, but they probably weren't. But they have a really wonderful couple vibe, and it's just a lot of fun. Okay, Blonde Cheat, I think, was one of two. Joan, I'll double check this here, but I think it was one of the Joan Fontaine. Let me make sure I have that right. Yes, this was one of two Joan Fontaine comedies. I was on a kick to find 1930s Joan Fontaine comedies. There aren't many, but there's a few, either comedies or musicals of hers, because she's just so darn charming. And I know she wasn't known as a comedian per se. She was, obviously, I know, and I'm sure you know her from, Rebecca, and she's been in so many other great dramas. But she's also pretty good at comedy. So this Blonde Sheet one was pretty good. I think I have a review on it here. Let me see. Oh, maybe I didn't. Well, let me get back to that later. I would recommend seeing it. And I have this one on, all of these are on my Google Drive, Google Doc. So you can access the links there. Miranda, 1948. And I'm going to check that because I remember this one being really good. Okay, I do remember this one now. This one is very good. It's a Glenn Johns, Glennis Johns. You may know her. Actually, the first time I ever saw her was in, well, probably in Murder She Wrote because she was, everybody was in Murder She Wrote. But I think the first time I actually remembered her in a movie was in The Ref with, the comedian Dennis. I can't think of his last name, but anyway, she was an older woman at that point. But anyway, she's very young in this one. This is 1948, and you may remember her from The Card with Alec Guinness. So and I think she's been in probably in Mary Poppins or something like that. This is a really really good movie. It's a mermaid movie, and a lot of people tend to compare it to the mermaid movie that was made in the 40s, I think, or late 40s with William Powell and I can't remember, it was Anne Blythe. And that one, I agree with most people on that one. That one is kind of subpar. This is definitely, of all the mermaid movies I've seen, which there aren't that many, this one is really good. So you should totally watch it. It's on YouTube right now, 1948. And she's part of it's because she's just wonderful. And Margaret Rutherford is in it. So those of you who are who either like Margaret Rutherford by herself or you like her because you know her from Agatha Christie movies, you should totally check. She's got a nice, I think it's not a huge role, but it's a supporting, supporting character. Bloodhounds of Broadway. This is one of those musicals that I thought was just fine, and it was very worth seeing. I think it gets a lot of crap unnecessarily. Now, I'm not talking about the 1989 remake. I'm talking about the one from 1952. There was a really awful remake of it from that has like Madonna and some other people, and I couldn't even get through it. This is the one I'm talking about is Yeah, 1952 with Mitzi Gaynor. And so I'll just read you my review here. If you're familiar with musicals from the classic era, you will recognize that this is not a high budget musical. So it's not like a Singin' in the Rain or something like that. So I mention this because for a lower budget musical, it's pretty good. Mitzi Gaynor is excellent, but in addition, she's supported by some supporting actors whom I've never heard of before, but they surprised me in their above average quality. They kind of reminded me of like Alan Jenkins, or if you know 1930s films, and also the dancers with Mitzi Gaynor that accompanied her kind of reminded me of, like, if you're familiar with Gower and Marge Champion, there was a lot of really good supporting dancers with her. So this is a 20th Century Fox musical, so you know that's kind of what we're dealing with. Um, so if you like those 40s Fox musicals, you'll probably like this one. Plus, it's got a Damon Runyon story. So those of you who know Guys and Dolls, it's got a very similar kind of vibe to it. So yeah, check that one out, especially if you like musicals. I also did something for the boys. I think that was on, I think I might have done that on July 4th or something. I tried to watch it on a patriotic holiday. It was either that or Memorial Day. I can't remember which one, but that's always a good one. Any Carmen Miranda musical or film is always worth watching. That one I liked because I think they tried to like remodel this house, and it involves some of the different servicemen, and you kind of see a variety of different people coming in and out, and there's different like social classes because it's the army, and so there's different ranks and things like that. So it is a variety of different people. Uh, there were a couple duds in my list. One of them is called "Let's Do It Again," which is a musical remake of "The Awful Truth." And of course, you know, "The Awful Truth" is from 1937, and that's like one of the most famous screwball comedies. And so they tried in the 50s to make like musical remakes, which you would think would be actually is a great idea, but for some reason they just didn't quite work. So this one I think was one with Jane Wyman, and honestly I don't remember who the man was. It was probably somebody pretty good, but it was okay. Not really. To be honest, I probably wouldn't recommend it. I didn't. I had a kind of a hard time getting through it. Maid's Night Out is another one I watched with. So if you want to do a double bill of Joan Fontaine comedies, you could do Blonde Sheet, which is on the I just mentioned a few minutes ago, and then follow it up with Maid's Night Out. And that's I think those are like back to back Joan Fontaine comedies, and I think I watched them really close together, so they kind of blend together for me. Even though she plays different characters in them, I think in one movie she plays kind of like an upper class character, and in another movie she plays kind of lower class character. So, A Weekend in Havana is one I come back to quite a bit. I don't know why, I just like it a lot. It's Alice Faye and John Payne, and of course Carmen Miranda and Cesar Romero. And this one is 1941, and it's about how Alice Faye has kind of saved up all of her money to go on this cruise, and the ship gets in some kind of like mechanical, or I don't know, it somehow gets in trouble. And so the cruise ship company sends down John Payne to try and negotiate with her to try and, like, because she's the only one who won't sign the agreement to like leave the ship or something like that. And so he has to like basically sell her on this idea of like, I'm going to give you this great vacation instead of the one that you saved up all your money for. And that's one storyline. And then there's another storyline with Carmen Miranda and Cesar Romero. And it's just watching Cesar Romero and Carmen Miranda, they should have had their own series because they're so dynamite on film. It was just I just love them. Brewster's Millions, you should watch that with there's one from 1945 which I watched. I had never seen it before. I think it's on Tubi right now. And it's also on YouTube. So but that I think that's the original one, and it's basically pretty much the same plot as the one with Richard Pryor and John Candy, which I had also only just seen recently in its entirety. So a little different. I mean, they're not like the same movie. It's the same plot line. Um, can you spend $1 million within 30 days um, without? I can't remember what the conditions are, but there's conditions on how you spend the money, that sort of thing, in order to inherit the amount. Um, but it's good. It's a good movie. Josette, 1938. I'm sitting here looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, I don't remember it for some reason. If it comes back to me, I'll let you know. Take a Letter, Darling is one I like because it's one of the Rosalind Russell career films. That's the one of the um, kind of like, I don't know if there was a benefit to being in World War II, but I guess one of the side benefits. There was a couple side benefits in during the war in Hollywood. One of them is you saw more people of color in. Yes, of course they were usually servants, but they actually got more lines. I think that was one of them. One of the things that happened, and then number two is, of course, it was more common to see Caucasian women in lead roles, of course, but um, it was very rare to have a career comedy series. The movies that she made, they weren't really a series, but looking back now, you can kind of see them as a series. Like Take a Letter, Darling is an executive, female executive played by Rosalind Russell, needs a male secretary. Now it's, of course, it's in the 40s, so it's going to be completely, you have to think about what was going on, culturally at that time. So, but it's still kind of revolutionary, considering the other kinds of movies that are out at that point. So if you compare it, within its own time frame, it's actually quite interesting. And there's a couple other movies she made that were where she's an executive, and it's kind of unusual to see that. I think there was maybe a couple other people that pulled it off, maybe Barbara Stanwyck or something like that. And I can't think of anybody right now, but she made at least three or four of them. And usually they were either Brian Ahern or Fred McMurray, or there might be another one with someone other than those two, but they tended to be cast with her quite a bit. So that's a good one, 1942. I got to look at this because I'm not remembering this now. Mr. and Mrs. North. I think I remember that being pretty good, actually. Okay, You Can't Beat Love. There must have been three of them that I watched. Let me come back to Mr. and Mrs. North here. But You Can't Beat Love, 1937. I think that was another one of those Joan Fontaine and Preston Foster films. So, like I said, just watch that with the set. But let me see what Mr. and Mrs. North, because I think I remember that being pretty good. Okay, I do remember this now. This is a Gracie Allen. Yeah, this is a good one. Especially if you like Gracie Allen. I don't think George Burns is in this with her, but you'll see some familiar faces like Felix Bressart, who a lot of you might know from The Shop Around the Corner and several of Lubitsch films. He was a Lubitsch guy. Tom Conway, you might know him. Virginia Gray's in it. Porter Hall, you know him from Preston Sturgis movies. Millard Mitchell, who ironically, Millard Mitchell was in plays RF in Singin' in the Rain, so it's kind of funny. And yeah, So there's some familiar faces in, and she's basically it's a detective story. Married sleuths find a corpse in the closet and round up suspects. So I think it's kind of like doing yet another, you know, William Powell, Myrna Loy kind of clone series. But I kind of like the idea of trying to take different actors and do a series of couple sleuths. I think it can be fun. Now, Casanova's Big Night. This is one that I really think you need to watch because it was a lot of fun and I had never seen it before. It's a Bob Hope film, but again, it's with a much older Joan Fontaine. So she's a little more of a wisecracker in this movie. It's 1954, so compared to the ones in 1937, she's aged a bit, but she's still as funny as ever. And let me see if I can find my I just remember, a little side note. When I posted this on Instagram, what I decided to do, because sometimes I like to post these, I'll post a picture of the movie I'm watching and I'll say, now watching Casanova's Big Night. I'll mention this in a later video. Little did I know it was going to take me 3 months to like make the video. But long story short, I'll put a piece of music either from the movie or something that makes me think of it. Well, for this movie, I went ahead and used, even though it's from 1954, I went ahead and put Casanova by Levert, which is from like 1986. So I just thought that was kind of fun. So yeah, here's my review. I'm on a Joan Fontaine kick, and also I've been enjoying Bob Hope's comedies. This is Joan in the 50s, so she's slightly older at this point, but I like it because it allowed her to be a little more wisecracking and sassy. And she also got to do a bit of sword fighting. So if you like sword fighting, and I have a whole list of sword fighting movies on my letterbox, so I enjoy it. And that's rare for a 1954 film. Bob is, of course, very good with his quick one-liners, like he usually is. And he actually surprised me with some half decent sword fighting too. The supporting cast is also very good, including Basil Rathbone. So you know he's going to be good with a sword. Oh, and also the studio did a life-size replica of a Venice canal, which is pretty awesome. I mean, when you think of how much trouble these studios went to kind of recreate, although it would have been nice to, always have on location is always great, but and I enjoy on location quite a bit actually. But it's also really nice to see what kind of like grand kind of creations that they come up with. So, oh, and by the way, You Can't Beat Love, since I actually found this. This is one of the Preston Foster, Joan Fontaine films that I mentioned earlier. I just want to let you know that that is a political corruption, like B movie comedy. So it's a lighthearted, but if you like a little bit of political corruption, kind of small town political corruption in your storyline, definitely check it out. It's a B movie, so it's not high budget or anything like that. Uh, yeah, yeah. Remember I mentioned the trend that happened where they would like take an old 1930s comedy and make it into a musical. There was one that was even worse called You Can't Run Away from It, 1956. And it had June Allison, who I really don't like anyway, but it had Jack Lemmon, who I love. And I couldn't even finish it. It was so awful, which is kind of saying something because I really like Jack Lemmon, but I just couldn't do it. So to remedy that, I watched The Barclays of Broadway, which I love, and that's Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. And it's interesting because it's a late Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire. So it's not part of that original run that they did of like whatever it is, 6 or 7 movies in a row. This is one that they did in 1949. So I think they hadn't done a musical prior to this for like at least maybe 9 years, 10 years, something like that. So it was kind of like a nice reunion for them. And yeah, that's just a classic. So plus it's got Oscar Levant in it, I believe. And I think he's in that. Dulcie, this was one I had never seen before. And I think it had I get my Ann's mixed up. Ann Southern, that's who it is. Um it's I gave it 2.5 stars. It's worth seeing. It's a good little B movie comedy. It has that kind of ditzy blonde archetype, but it not completely ditzy, like the kind that knows more than she lets on. Um, I think the only thing that kind of bothered me is maybe her pitch. The pitch of her voice was just a little bit too high for me most of the time because I've seen her in other movies, and so I know she's really quite talented, and I've enjoyed her performances in other movies. So she might have just kind of gone like a little bit, or maybe the director wanted it a little bit more exaggerated or something like that. But there was a couple scenes that were really, really funny. Ones where she's driving a motorboat are kind of like a Gracie Allen, since we were just talking about her. So maybe she was going for kind of a Gracie Allen kind of thing. But it's a nice little short flick. So now, at the time that I was watching these movies, it was Rosalind Russell's birthday. I think this might have been in June. So yeah. So Never Wave at a WAC. I think I watched that for the first time. I like Rosalind Russell a lot, so it was hard for me to give her only 2.5 stars. It's not really her, it's usually either the other people or maybe the movie just kind of low budget or just not quite there. Um, it was okay. She was great, and Marie Wilson and Paul Douglas helped the film quite a bit. But it's just not quite on the par with some of the other films that I've mentioned are hers, which I'm going to watch them again, so don't worry. Tell It to the Judge, 1949. I think I remember that being quite good. Again, another career film. I might have to rewatch that again and follow up on that. Um, Never a Dull Moment. Oh, this one was good. I didn't do a review, but I should have. It's Edward G. Robinson in a Disney film with Dick Van Dyke, and it's kind of like a mistaken identity. Dyke's an actor who's mistaken for, I think, a gangster, and of course, Edward G. Robinson plays the gangster that he's supposed to meet up with, and Dick Van Dyke ends up going along with the. It's kind of like one of those things where everybody thinks he's the guy, so and he can't convince them that he's not the guy, so he might as well just kind of go with it. So, and of course Henry Silva's in it too. So, I think this must have been after Ocean's 11 came out. So, and I think Henry Silva was in that. So, he usually plays kind of like a thug. And I finally saw In Like Flint with James Coburn, and I think that's the second one. Yeah, for some reason I saw the second one, probably because it's on YouTube. So if you want to check that out, it's probably still on YouTube. I did like it. Uh, I absolutely love James Coburn's speaking voice, so it's kind of hard for me not to like anything he's in. Little side note: he was a student of Bruce Lee's, so and especially in the '60s, he was studying with him. So I think he gets to use a little bit of martial arts in the Flint movies. I did like the music a lot. There's a lot of bossa nova, kind of Burt Bacharach style. Um, probably the kind of, I'm sure this was the kind of music that Austin Powers movies were kind of spoofing. Um, and Jerry Goldsmith is the film composer, and I really like him. Um, oh, this is from my review. I had forgotten about this. Anna Lee, who those of you who watched, well, you might know her from The Sound of Music. She was one of the nuns, but she also, if you watched soap operas in the '80s, she was Lillian Quartermain in General Hospital. But anyway, she's got a short speech in like Flint where she says basically that women have always been instrumental in shaping society much more so than men realize. And I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing to have in a 1967 film. Um, the rest of it's not very feminist at all, which it's not supposed to be. So I was kind of surprised at pleasantly by the parts that were unusually feminist. So I think it's worth watching. Um, let's see, Hit the Deck. I have seen this one before. I love watching it. I don't know what it is with like a musical on board a ship. It's just uh, oh, plus this has got Russ Tamblyn, and he gets to do a lot of gymnastic, dancing, and juggling, and he's just amazing. I mean, he's not just a great dancer. I mean, he's just an amazing acrobat, and of course, Debbie Reynolds is wonderful. Um, there is a scene in it that's kind of like if you've seen A Damsel in Distress with, speaking of Joan Fontaine and Fred Astaire, there's a scene in it also with uh, George Burns and Gracie Allen where they go through this kind of swirly kind of fun house that kind of where they kind of go through a slide that kind of curls around and around. It's quite memorable when you see it. It's probably like the best thing in the whole movie. And so in Hit the Deck in 1955, because Damsel in Distress is from the 30s, Hit the Deck, they kind of try to recreate that scene, and it's choreographed by Hermes Pan, who also, as you know, was a favorite of Fred Astaire's. It's still a B movie musical, but I think it's quite good for a B movie. I would definitely watch it. So it's mostly a showcase for Ann Miller, Jane Powell, and Debbie Reynolds. I mean, that's a pretty awesome triple billing. And Russ Tamblyn's pretty awesome. The only downside, I think, is Vic Damone and Tony Martin get way too much screen time, considering they're not as great as the others, in my opinion. Plus, if you're not a fan of their singing voices, it kind of makes it a little long. So that's really my only complaint about it. But it's got really some old standards like Sometimes I'm Happy, More Than You Know, and Hallelujah. And so, yeah, I give that one 3 stars. So that's one that I watch again. Vogues of 1938. Honestly, I know it had Joan Bennett in it, and I like her. I may have to come back to that one. Carry On Camping. If you've seen the Carry On series, it's interesting. There's some that I absolutely love, like Carry On Cruise. Carry On Cruising is like one of my favorites, and that's from like the 60s, mid 60s, I think. Carry On Camping's okay. There's another couple ones that I like. Carry On. It's the one about the employment office. Carry On Regardless, I think is the name of it. I might have mentioned it already. There's a couple others though, but let me tell you about a drama I watched, which was absolutely amazing. And if you haven't seen it already, you probably have, but it's pretty famous. But I hadn't. It's called The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. It's from 1965. Richard Burton, absolutely amazing, of course. And I'm going to give you my review. I was expecting this to be good because Richard Burton always delivers. I'm a big fan of his voice, especially. I also liked Claire Bloom, Shakespearean actress, and the rest of the cast were great. I got that and so much more. What I walked away from this film thinking about the most was 4 things. Oscar Werner's amazing performance. Oh, yes, he was so good. Oh, my gosh. Oscar Werner. I need to check more things of his out. I looked up his bio, and I think he did mostly German films, but God, he was amazing. He almost showed up Richard Burton, really. He was that good. Oswald Morris's fabulous cinematography. The cinematography is so, oh my gosh, so amazing. Carried the movie just as much as the actors' performances. Yeah. Claire Bloom brought so much innocence and intensity to her role. And of course, Richard Burton always delivers. Beautifully shot with lovely, intense performances. And it felt a lot like The Third Man, the Carol Reed vibe, only I think more serious. I mean, Third Reed's serious too, but this is, it's made a good 20 plus years later. So, an outstanding film. I usually watch comedy and musicals. So, when I go for thrillers or drama, I expect a lot, and I got that and a ton more. So, outstanding. I think I gave this 4.5 stars. I don't know why I didn't give it five. Who knows? Maybe I was just feeling, why did I give it 4.5? I should have given it five. I'll rewatch it again. Um, Slightly French. I love this one. This is a Donna Michi, who I adore, and Dorothy Lamour, who I've started to really enjoy because I just don't know her movies that much. I think I've only seen her in the Bob Hope movies, Bing Crosby movies. And I really liked her in this movie, Slightly French. 1949 is when it came out. It really gave Dorothy a chance to shine in a lead role because she usually kind of plays like a supporting role with Bob and Bing. Don Amici's always a great leading man in these kinds of comedies or musical comedies. And this has a little bit of music in it. And yeah, their chemistry was really great. And it's directed by Douglas Sirk. Believe it or not, I was really surprised by that because I think that's kind of an unusual type of film for him. But anyway, I loved it. Um, and I wrote that I'm not sure why this movie isn't on the standard list of screwball comedies put forth by textbooks, as I think it's just as good as some of the ones that are on the highly recommended list. So, like, if you went to like criterion.org and they have a film forum, like forum discussion board, where you can get lists. I think I mentioned it in an earlier video where you can get lists of screwball comedies. I don't think this one has ever been on any list that I've ever seen. I think I just came across it by accident. Because sometimes what I do is I go through Letterboxd and I just look for anything that's from the 30s, 40s, and 50s that's in the genre of two or three different genres, and I'll just see what I can come up with. And so with that kind of casts a wider net. And if you have a wider net, you might get something that may not be on one of these lists. So I would have put this on a list that's, because some of the stuff that film historians put on screwball comedy lists that are, not the super famous ones, but like the ones that are a little less famous, I don't understand why they're thinking for just a few. There's a few here and there where I'm like, yeah, that wasn't really a screwball comedy. I don't know why that's on there. But anyway. Carry On Admiral, it must have been half decent because I do remember it being, I think this must have been it was 1957. This might have been the one that wasn't really part of the Carry On series, but it had the same name. I think I remember that being something kind of unusual. Was this the Dirk Bogarde? No, this was Joan Sims. Of course, she's from the Carry On crew. And it had David Tomlinson, Peggy Cummins, Brian Reese. Okay, this one is good. It's kind of like, it's got kind of a sitcom vibe to it, which I kind of like. Two friends get drunk and decide to switch identities. So one's a parliamentary secretary and the other one is the captain of a ship, and they switch positions. So it's very much, it's got that kind of feel to it. April in Paris, I enjoyed that one. That was a Doris Day. It was interesting, though. I think that was one where I was really surprised to find out that Ray Bolger and her didn't get along, which I thought was really odd because I would have thought they would have gotten along. But it's a good one. They, you can kind of tell maybe their chemistry isn't all that great, but there's a couple of really great scenes in it. The Kid from Brooklyn. Oh, yes, this one was great. Danny Kaye as a boxer. I don't always I don't really seek out like boxer movies, but this one was really good. This was kind of like I could see where like maybe like Don Knotts was watching this or something. Let me see if I did a review on this one. Norman Z. McLeod, who I tend to like as a director, um, he's a milkman basically by trade. Danny Kaye is in this movie, but he knocks out a champion boxer who was flirting with his sister, and so the newspapers get a hold of the story, and I think eventually they kind of finagle Danny Kaye's character into boxing for real, and it's very charming. Virginia Mayo's in it, and Vera Ellen. What's not to love? Vera Ellen. God, I think that was originally why I watched it. I saw Danny Kaye and Vera Ellen in the cast. I thought I'm going to watch that. So yeah, The Baroness and the Butler. I would really recommend seeing this right now because we're in an election year right now, and this is very much about the classes. And if you like that sort of thing, like I do, it's 1938. It's a William Powell comedy, and it's kind of like there's been a couple other movies I've watched recently this summer that have kind of had this kind of vibe where they're either about political corruption or they're about social classes or maybe small government, but in kind of a quaint comedy setting. Um, I would watch this one though for sure. 1938, so it's in that height of screwball comedy era, classic era. So, and that one's on YouTube. I also watched the Great American Broadcast, which I had seen before, but I kind of wanted to see it again. And that's one that's kind of like about the beginnings of like radio, like national radio broadcasting. But it's really just an excuse to have Alice Faye and John Payne, um, and I think it's Jack Oakey. I think, and there's some good numbers in that one. Good music. Um, if you like radio, it's kind of interesting. There's like some technical things in it that are, historical things about radio that at the industry that are kind of interesting. Interesting. Three for the show. I think I might have. I think I might have reviewed that one. That's a musical, and that is from 1955. And again, guess what? It's a musical reworking of a classic screwball comedy film called Too Many Husbands. And it's a Betty Grable. I think this might have been her last movie. Um, but she's a top singer and dancer who's been widowed by World War II. She marries her late husband's songwriting partner, and Gower champions in it. So, it's going to be good too. And then Jack Lemmon, her first husband, turns up alive. And that's where the plot is very much like Too Many Husbands, which I haven't actually watched recently. I may watch that soon. That's Jean Arthur, who's fabulous, of course. And but yeah, this is the musical reworking. So that's on Tubi, Tubi. Miss Pacific Fleet was one I wanted to watch because I like the pairing of Joan Blondell and um, Glenda Farrell. I think my favorite is Havana Nights. This one isn't quite as good as Havana Nights, probably because it's got too much screen time for the other guys that are in it. I think if they would have spent more time on Glenda and Joan, that would have been better because the two of them have really good chemistry. And, it's just one of those things. So if this is your first Glenda and Joan movie, don't be discouraged because Havana Nights is much better. But it's not bad. And for Gene Kelly's birthday on August 23rd, or around thereabouts, I wanted to watch Brigadoon from 1954. And that's still a wonderful movie. That was another case of them having, I think they had to recreate the kind of idyllic and very enchanted village of Brigadoon in the studio system, and it's really amazing. Because there is a couple scenes where they have actual animals on there, so they had to have, I think, the kind of the cows that are over in Scotland that have are a little more have darker hair. Um, I can't remember the types of cows they are, but they had those on the set. And I think I even Googled this while I was watching it because I was like, I had never noticed the animals before. Maybe just, you know, how sometimes you watch a movie, you just don't notice certain things. And I think I found out that Gene Kelly was like really afraid of certain of the cows for some reason, which I can understand because when you see how big they are, they're pretty large. But just having those, I can't imagine having a studio set with that much wildlife on it. I just, you know, it just seems like that would be a really difficult thing to do because I think they had sheep on there too, and they had, I think they had a couple other kinds of animals too. But anyway, of course, it's a fabulous movie. Sid Charisse dances beautifully, and Gene Kelly and her are just so beautiful together. So if you haven't already seen that, you must see it. Um, I think I got through everything. So while I have slowed down a bit on how frequently I'm watching movies, I'm probably watching a little more TV lately and listening to music. I will continue to make these videos. Maybe I'll make one about the TV shows I'm watching. Maybe I'll make one about the music I'm listening to. But I will continue to watch classic films and I'll split them up into groups because it's good to have like the last edition I did, if you haven't watched it already, was like more 1970s to, 2019-ish. So it was more, at least in the last 50 years. And then I try and group the classic era, 1930 to basically 1970-ish. Even though the classic era really ended around 1963 or 64, I just added a few years onto it. Um, so yeah, so I just group them like that. But again, go to the link tree, go to my Instagram and hit link in bio. And there's a Google Doc there called Movie Links. Click on that, opens right up, and you can just see all the movies there. All the links are available. Usually, I what I try to do is I try to find something first on YouTube or an app like Tubi or something like that. If I can't find it there, then I put the another link. But you'll know the link when you see it, and it may or may not be compatible with your computer. So um, just have that in mind. I do also try to search for them at Internet Archive, which is totally compatible with anybody's computer. The only problem with Internet Archive, by the way, is you do have to hit play a couple times. So anyway, but a lot of these are on YouTube, and sometimes that will kind of like encourage me to watch those sooner than, let's say, something else. If I see something pop up on YouTube and I'm like, oh, I haven't seen that in a while. Like I can tell you right now, I've got a couple tucked away for October that I hope to get to. And one that I try to watch in October is either Clue or The Burbs with Tom Hanks. I might try. I'll try and see if I can watch Arsenic and Old Lace because that's actually takes place on Halloween. But before that, I'll let you know if there's anything before that. All right, so signing off for now. If you guys have any requests or suggestions of things that you'd like to, watch, let me know. Okay.